All right, so the following is a discussion between myself and an emergency room physician who is currently going through my RISE program. We actually have two doctors currently in the program. Both of them are seeing absolutely fantastic results, and it's because they're what I call a high performance client, meaning that they're very disciplined. They wake up early, they're usually eating healthy, they exercise, they know how to be resilient, they know how to follow a framework. And for those people, all I got to do is just give them a few tools. I've got to give them some direction, some encouragement, some support, and they usually see the fastest results out of any of my clients. So this discussion is him kind of going over the before and after, kind of what he was struggling with before and how he is now. And the reason why I asked him to do this is because the last couple meetings that he showed up to with our Rise meetings, he's just talked about how he's feeling amazing. His depersonalization realization has gone, and I think he said in the discussion it went away within 3 weeks. And I want to say it's been about 2 months now, and existential obsession and thoughts are gone, like existential OCD, DPDR is gone, and a number of other symptoms are gone. And he's getting to the point where even just like stress in general is starting to go away. And so let this just encourage you that if an emergency room physician can beat these symptoms, you can too. Could you imagine being an ER doctor and you never know what's going to come in? You could, have somebody with a gunshot wound, or you could have, somebody dying, and yet he is beating these symptoms despite that. And so it's going to really encourage you. Make sure to click like. It'll help the algorithm get this out there. Comment something below and share this video, and just know that there is incredible hope for you, and you're amazing. I'll talk to you soon.
How you doing, Jordan? How's everything?
It's going very well. Thank you so much for doing this.
Of course, of course.
I really appreciate it, man. And so I really just wanted to just kind of celebrate some of the results that you were talking about on the last couple meetings. Sound good?
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, that sounds amazing, Jordan. Yeah, and I'm obviously more than happy to talk about this. It's a good thing to sort of celebrate, and I do want to say I'm very, very, very thankful to have met you and to have been part of your coaching as well too. So I feel very grateful about that. I do. So I'll talk about the before, and maybe I'll talk about specifically the before is right at the time I was meeting you. And at that point in time, I was having these, I would say intrusive thoughts. I was having fight or flight energy in my body, and it disrupted my sleep. I think it disrupted the way I was thinking. And I think to me, the most disturbing thoughts I was having were these existential intrusive thoughts.
Yes.
And I think that's part of the reason how I found your videos online. I don't know what it was. Some sort of fate kind of led me there. And then as soon as I was watching some of your videos, all of a sudden it felt that what I was experiencing wasn't as unique as I thought, because I thought it was very particular to me. I'm going crazy. There's something wrong with me. Like no
Sure.
one understands what I'm going through in my head, and they're walking around like life normally, not understanding some of the thoughts I'm having. And I thought I opened up maybe Pandora's box, right? I'm like, wow,
Yes.
maybe I stepped into something that I shouldn't have opened up. Now I have this knowledge of this existence that I'm living in, and this is terrifying. This is terrible. And
Sure.
that to me was probably the scary symptom I was having.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
for me,
yeah.
I remember because I dealt with existential OCD severely, and I technically started to obsess over existence in high school, but it became very
Hmm.
pronounced during, a series of months where just one thought of existence would send me into full-blown panic and depersonalization realization, and I kind of felt like I had this knowledge that allowed me to see humanity from this zoomed in perspective, and I was just baffled that nobody else had this knowledge or was thinking about this. I was like, how can people just live their lives whenever we're floating around on this planet and we're human beings, and what is consciousness and what is this and how does this work?
Oh,
And it was just absolutely terrifying, and it felt permanent. But obviously
yeah.
it wasn't. And I still do enjoy, thinking about existence. And, my mentor that I mentioned to you, he and I are
Hmm.
both, you could say, existentialist in that, like we both kind of study a little bit of quantum physics and,
Yeah.
theories
I'm the same
about,
way too.
Yeah, so it's like it's one thing to have
Yeah.
a curiosity about existence,
Yep.
which I think is natural and
Yep.
healthy, but it's another thing if it's, going from one terrifying existential theory to the next, and you're just absolutely obsessed with
Yeah.
consciousness, and it very much consumes a lot of your time, and it's very
Yep.
stressful. That's existential OCD versus existential
Yeah.
curiosity, right? Yeah.
Yes, I totally agree. And actually, if I was to just sort of describe my experience in a quick timeline, what actually happened was is that I probably had my first, yeah, it was my first true panic attack with trauma symptoms afterwards. I would say a few years before I met you, and that might have took maybe 6 months, 8 months until some of the trauma symptoms were improving. But then I was only sort of coping. I never went back to like my true baseline. And I always imagined like, oh, like I would love to get back into that life that I was before. Mind you, that life that I was in before probably wasn't the best, right? But in
Sure.
hindsight, now I know that. But at the time, I thought that's what normal was, even though I was living in
Yeah.
a chronic state of anxiety. But I didn't have the trauma symptoms. So I initially
Right.
had the trauma symptoms. I saw a therapist. We tried to work out things, but to be honest, I think it was just time that got better. I even tried medications, but just through time, some of my symptoms started getting a little bit better. I started going out a little bit more socially, interacting with the world, slowly going back to work. But then over the year and 2 year after these symptoms were slowly getting better, I noticed that like I was never back to what I was quote unquote before.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I just didn't know what to do. And so I would go to work, try my best, and then sometimes even at work there'd be things that would even trigger me, and I'm surprised, right? I'm like, I never used to be triggered by this stuff, but now someone
Mm.
else's trauma can sort of start rubbing that wound that I had and starts bringing out a little bit more symptoms. And then again, that would disrupt my sleep, disrupt my work. And then it's just sort of escalated a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more until out of nowhere. And you've described this in your video before too, where sometimes you might be confused, right? The cup is getting full, 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 but then something happened that doesn't seem all that traumatic, but it was enough for the cup to overflow. And that's
Sure.
actually what happened again. So it was like 3 years later, I thought I was recovering, and then all of a sudden, I had these sort of symptoms reemerge, but this time they reemerged with like vengeance. And I was just so let down. I'm like, like, is this just going to be me for life now? I don't know
Oh,
what to do. Like, I've tried therapy, I've tried medications, and I never even went back to my life the way I was before. So I thought I was doomed, right? It's like I opened up Pandora's box, and I don't know if I'm ever going to get to that life that I had before. That's when I stumbled across your stuff and I started doing your teaching. And that to me, and it didn't really take much of convincing because as I was getting to know your videos and getting to know your techniques, I'm like, yes, this actually makes sense. It does. What I was doing before was like what you were saying, 20th century sort of way of doing therapy. But you need something that's going to be actually like long lasting and effective. And your techniques that you specifically mentioned made so much sense because they required you to do it often and regularly
yes.
and to be consistent with. And that's the biggest difference.
Right.
More regularly, as opposed to doing just like a one time session, you feel better for that one session. What happens when I go home? What happens when I go to work? Do I do a session while I'm at work? Of course not. What do I do when I'm in these situations? One session a week or two sessions a week of yoga, which I tried. Not going to be helpful because I'm not going to do yoga at work when I'm feeling stressed. I know the
Sure.
yoga might help unstress and unwind me for that moment, but what do I do when the next moment stresses me out? And that I never really had an answer for until I sort of met your way of teaching and your way of learning. And that's when my symptoms finally started improving. And talking about the 4 different states of like anxiety and trauma, when I met you, I was in state 4. That's like DPR, derealization, depersonalization. I had it all. And the trauma symptoms were the first to go. And I think they probably went away in 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. They were like very minimal. And when they would appear, I didn't necessarily have like a resistance to knowing how to deal with them. I kind of almost welcomed them in a way where I'm like, yeah, now I know what to do. I'll try
Sure.
this one technique because I have a lot of fight or flight in my body. And then bam, it gets a little bit better. So the trauma symptoms started improving over time. The intrusive thoughts, like the existential anxiety, went away quite fast. And that, Jordan, I was impressed about. I didn't believe how fast they were actually going to go away. And then all I had to do was just sort of tackle the stuff that I was avoiding. So my avoidance behavior, again, I tried some of your techniques. And I've noticed over time that I was just avoiding things less and less. And I didn't even have that sort of like exposure anxiety where I would used to think, oh, if I go here, what would happen if I get these
Mm.
symptoms? Oh, if I go outside to the park and I start having like depersonalization, what am I going to do? That went away as my symptoms went away too. So like it was all tied together. The more calm I felt, the less anxiety I had even about going and doing things that I normally want to do. I'm now thankfully at a point where I don't think I have like any avoidance. I would say if my avoidance before was like 100%, maybe now it's like 1 or 2%, but I see it more as a challenge. I'm like, okay, if I'm avoiding
Yeah.
it, let me do it. Now I know what to do if I ever feel anxiety or if I ever feel stressed out in those situations. And I feel confident now that I have like a toolbox of things to like employ when I'm feeling that
Yes.
way. And I actually didn't do that. I've done it quite a few times, even when I'm at work. So that's
Yeah.
been helpful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And
Yeah.
I want to speak to what you had mentioned about the traditional approach for, stress, anxiety. Let's just, even though that it includes trauma, which is a state of overwhelm, which triggers DPDR, time filling, distorted memory issues. Let's just throw it all in a box and let's just say, the common approach to stress is that you have to leave the stimulus, right? You're feeling
Yes.
stressed out. You gotta break away and do some yoga or do,
Yes.
10 minutes of deep breathing or mindfulness meditation or this thing or that thing. Or, you need to show up to a therapist and talk about your symptoms, right? Once or twice per week. And listen, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with any of those things, but to your point,
Hmm.
what about if you're, doing an operation on somebody or a surgery on somebody or,
Yep.
you're at work and
You're in the
like
middle of a speech or a middle of a presentation, right?
yeah, exactly. Like if you're in a situation where you can't break away, but you still need to calm your nervous system, it's very problematic. And so, I always tell people that I work with, like, I'm not against long form relaxation. In fact, I encourage that, but we need to be listening to the body and relaxing the body, befriending the body in real time in the
Yes.
presence of the
Yes.
stimulus because that's part of what's going to show your brain that this sensory trigger is not dangerous is you do exposure coupled with relaxation. But most people they're focused on okay, if I'm stressed out, well, I need to go on vacation, right? If I'm
Yeah.
stressed out,
Yeah.
I need to just get away from this situation. But that's actually sensitizing the trigger even more because
Right.
whatever you avoid, your
Yeah.
brain assumes is a lion trying to eat you. So we need to be in the presence of the trigger and then start to do things that
Yeah.
that convey safety, such as calming the body. And so anyway, man, I'm really glad to hear that this
Yeah.
has really influenced you. So, at
It
this
has. And
point,
Jordan, if I can
yeah,
add there too,
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
the body focused way of treatment makes a lot of sense because before, I had this sort of knowledge, I would try to think of ways, but it would all be done mentally, not body focused. Like, what are things I can think about that would reassure me? And that's what you do, right? Like, you have these intrusive thoughts, and then you feel compelled to do something to sort of make it feel a little bit better, right? But I'm dealing
yes,
with like symptoms, I'm dealing with thoughts. But then when you shift the focus to the body, then what you can do is befriend your body, start noticing what's in your body, and depending, and this is obviously what you teach exactly, depending on what you feel inside your body, here are different things you can do to make it better.
yep,
And that makes sense. It takes away your focus from the symptoms. You go to your body. It's like diagnosing like an issue. It's like the proper way to troubleshoot yourself. And you go, oh, my body, I have a lot of fight or flight energy. What's a good way to get rid of it? Bam. Oh, my body, I have a lot of tension. What can I do about it? Bam.
yep,
You teach a few techniques on that. So for me, my shift didn't become, oh my God, I'm having this existential anxiety thought. I'm having this thought. Okay, while I'm worried, I go back to my body. And then when I go back to my body, I notice exactly what symptoms are happening in my body, not in my head. And then I do your techniques, and then the symptoms slowly get better. And I love, love, love that. And actually, that's probably what Western medicine is lacking, is that we're losing that sort of knowledge that I think maybe our ancestors had. Kind of like the
yes,
way you talk about like animals, you see it's innate wisdom. They know what to do when they need to get rid of that extra tension in the body. They just know how. And I think for us, it's like we're lost in this sort of social media, online paradigm. We have too many distractions, vapes, drugs, food, and I think we just kind of get lost in this whole distraction, and we lost our like innate way of knowing how to heal. But you bring it back as if like it's natural to us, and that's the part, Jordan, that I love. You know, like it feels very organic. You know, things that I feel like I should have, like this feels like natural. It feels raw. Like I feel like this is probably what I should have been doing my entire life, you
Yeah.
know, naturally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And there's three things that you highlighted that I want to discuss with you. So the
Yeah.
first is, particularly in the Western world, we tend to worship the mind and we don't
Hmm.
emphasize the body enough. And like, let's take, for example, mindfulness, right? If you look at mindfulness, it came from Buddhism. And if you look at the
Yep.
Buddhist teaching of mindfulness, they would first focus on calming the body. They would not just go
Yep.
directly to the mind. And so our mindfulness practice sometimes does, but a lot of times doesn't even include a shift in physiology. But we tend to assume that all issues have a mental solution. And so it's like what Edmund Jacobson said, who created progressive muscle relaxation, is he says you can't have an anxious mind and a relaxed body. And I think one of the
Yes.
shifts that I've made with you and that I make with people and also that I had to make is the more that I can get my body relaxed and in a good state, get rid of the tension, adrenaline, emotion, and fatigue, and really
Yes.
listen to my body, as a secondary indirect consequence, it will calm my mind rather than trying to get rid of these thoughts that are biologically correct for the state of my body or other symptoms that are
Yep.
biologically correct. That's where the education comes in, because if you
Yes.
haven't gotten a proper 21st century education of why your symptoms are happening, you're going to spend your time wrestling with symptoms that are correct. For example, if there's an
Yes.
apple tree, it is correct for there to be apples. There's nothing wrong
Yeah.
with the apples if it's an apple tree. And so that's an analogy for the symptoms of fight, flight, freeze response. Because we don't know that they're biologically correct, we do the example of picking apples, meaning we have this direct approach towards the symptoms, acceptance, distraction,
Yeah.
CBT. And listen,
Yeah.
there are
Yeah.
some results, but they're never sustained because you haven't dealt with the roots, which in this case is a lack of self regulation, which is directly getting the body in a better place, as well as a lack of co regulation because humans still humans. And so, just like with an apple tree,
Yeah.
if we uproot the roots, the apples will automatically shut off. You don't even have to directly pick the apples.
Yes.
And then the last thing that I want to speak to, oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, that was probably what you described was the reason to why I relapsed into my symptoms, right? I did some of the other techniques that temporarily work. I did a lot of distraction. That was probably most of it. And my initial trauma symptoms were getting better, and I thought maybe things were getting better, but I did not even dare to like go into my body. And I think I lived in a very tense body, and it sort of just even describes what you're talking about. I didn't treat the root of the cause, and then eventually it just sort of surfaced, you know? So that's 100% true. I've like lived that experience, and I know it to be true just because of that, right? And what was the other thing you wanted to mention?
Well, let's speak to that for just a second, if we still have a little bit of
Yeah.
time. Is like what
Yeah.
what do you think led to you not including the body, like in just kind of focusing on the mind?
If I go into my body, this is like obviously personal, but from my experience, if I go into my body, I feel the panic inside. And I also feel, and I think this is a very common experience because I hear it all the time, even in your group sessions, is that there's this feeling of like overwhelm, right? I feel like whatever I'm going to experience inside my body overwhelms me. And then every time I do, I used to like kind of tap into my body, it would sort of also accompany with other symptoms. So if I go into my body, I might feel overwhelmed. Oh, and now here are the derealization and depersonalization symptoms. They're surfacing. Okay, now I'm learning. You're right, and you're right. All
Mm,
these sort of symptoms that I'm having are appropriate to the situation. If my brain thinks that like what I'm experiencing is going to be life threatening, maybe it does make sense to have these trauma symptoms, right? Like that's appropriate. I got to teach my brain the other way, and I got to teach my body the other way too, that like, oh no, no, like these are actually like I'm not in a dangerous situation. And
right.
it's your techniques that sort of help us be able to establish conditions of safety, right? And I think that's what I didn't have. My body felt like I was always on edge, even though my brain, I was distracted. My body, I think, was just like living on edge, thinking that at any moment something bad can happen to me, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was the case for me too. I remember whenever I tried to do I think yoga or it was it's definitely something that included the body. I want to say like
Mm-hmm.
meditation or something, some sort of YouTube video. And I will never ever forget it because I never was in my body ever. I mean, we're talking from the time I was a kid until my early 20s. I was not in my body. And this is whenever I was experiencing very, very severe anxiety and panic and DPDR and different things.
Mm.
But I came into my body for just like a few seconds. And I remember it was the most excruciatingly painful experience
Oh,
that I had ever had.
yeah.
And I remember saying, like,
Um,
why would anybody want to do meditation or yoga? I was like, this is horrible. And it's
oh
because I didn't
yeah.
realize how somatically dissociated that I was. Somatic meaning
Right.
body, dissociation meaning to separate. I had learned to navigate through life by living perpetually disembodied, right? I lost
Mm.
interoception, which is the experience of the embodied self, because it was too painful to be embodied, just like what you're talking about. I want to shift really
Okay. Okay.
fast to the last part of the conversation. You
Yep.
know, is that, let's say that somebody, is looking at all these different programs out there and just people that they could work with, and they're rightly skeptical. Maybe they've tried a bunch of stuff that didn't work, and then now they're like, okay, here's Jordan, and it sounds really good, but is this really working for people? What would you say to encourage them to give this a shot?
Um, I would say so. As encouragement, I would say probably watch a little bit more of your videos, the other people's stories, because more than likely you'll be able to sort of connect and actually see that this can't be fake, can't be scripted. Jordan and some of the people he's interviewing know a little bit too much about what you might be going through. And that in itself should kind of give you hope that like your situation is not unique. And you just need that hope and maybe a little bit of leap of faith there as well too, right? Just from what we're discussing, there's no way that Jordan or that some of these conversations can be scripted where we're trying to sell something when it's just so specific, so relevant to what you might be going through. So I would
Yes.
say I would encourage the people to watch a little bit more of the videos, see for themselves that like, you truly know this experience, you know this process, and everyone you interview has gone through something somewhat similar to what you might be going through, and then just a little bit of leap of faith that it works, and that leap of faith, just a little bit of that with that hope that you're able to give in your videos. I think that's all you really need, and then once you take the plunge, you'll see for yourself that it works pretty fast. You just have to do a little bit of that research, and I would just advise them to watch a bit more of your videos. And from your videos, your expertise does shine through. At least in my opinion, it's quite obvious.
Well, thank you very much for that. And just and maybe you can just speak to the meetings a little bit.
Oh yeah, the meetings are great, and you also find that like in the meetings, the way you sort of set it up, it's like in a positive environment with a positive culture, and you keep it that way as well. And what's nice is there's no judgment, there is no like
No.
criticism. It's an environment where it doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, which country you're from, because you can tell there's people from all over the world. It's great. There's just everyone wanting to get better. And
Yes.
what's better than that? People trying to get better together and being encouraging of each other. And every time we're sharing wins, you can tell that like people are quite happy to hear about other people's successes. If you're early in your development, it's nice to kind of see someone recovering, gives you a little bit of hope. And then as you start
Yes.
recovering, it feels good to sort of give other people hope there as well. Like you're kind of excited to share your win. So these meetings are definitely, definitely instrumental in part of the healing. And I would argue that if you don't have it, you might sort of lose that motivation or lose that hope, and you might kind of go back into your old habits. So the meeting is another good way of like keeping you motivated and keeping you
Yes.
determined, right, to keep up with these sort of good habits.
Absolutely. And lastly, talk about the Cinema Free Accelerator course. What was your experience like with that?
Oh, that was a masterclass, Jordan. I have to say, the way you structured it, because I think you even did some restructuring over time to find out what's better and what's worse, right? Like what works better. So I think the way you
13
did it is that
major
you,
13 major re-recordings over the last 6 years. Yes.
yes, and also the order of the way you presented. I'm
Yes.
thankful that I was actually here to do it where you kind of restructured it even, because it starts off right away with not just like teaching. You're actually like, sorry, not just theory teaching. You start off with like practical stuff that you can do as we're being taught. And I like that. It's not
Yes.
like you do the cognitive restructuring first and then you teach us about how to self-regulate later. You get right into it and in a
Yes.
very nice way. So like I remember when I was listening to your lectures, A, and you've mentioned this before too, and I 100% agree that just your videos themselves have a form of self-regulation and co-regulation from them. So
Yes.
they're soothing in a way because you've done it in like the calm, nice demeanor. And also on top of that too, each video would just get me a little bit excited. And what I mean by that is that just your opening video, I just felt like it was just a lot of hope. And then what you were describing made a lot of sense. And then your subsequent videos, I was like, I couldn't wait to get to it. I'm like, oh, okay, perfect. Yes, you already sold me, Jordan. I know that now conditions of safety and self-regulating your body is really important. Okay, I can't wait to get to the technique finally that you were teaching. And then the way the course was structured, I felt that it was like effortless. And in fact, like I couldn't, when you're suffering, there's nothing that will grab your attention better than like someone who's telling you that like, hey, this could make it better, right? You already feel that sort of determination that like I want to get an end to my symptoms. And your course was beautiful in knowing how to do that. It was so effortless. I love it. I love it.
Thank you so much. I take that as a huge compliment, just from somebody with your knowledge and expertise to say that it really means a lot, and I'm so glad that it impacted you.